Texas Tech, Oregon, New Year's Day. It will not even be noon. In fact, it'll be 9 a.m. Pacific time when this game kicks off, but it will be noon Eastern in the Orange Bowl down in Miami. These are the number 1 and number 2 explosive play offenses in America, and the over-under is 52.5, which means they can play fairly solid defense as well. You really got to trust your eyes on Texas Tech. There are a couple of conferences this year where their stat profiles are kind of in a silo. I'm not doing a lot of complicated data speak because I don't speak that language. But the ACC and the SEC, they got a lot of crossover out-of-conference results that kind of help contextualize the conferences, if you will. A team like Texas Tech doesn't have that. Texas Tech played Oregon State, and that was basically it as their out-of-conference competition. Ironically, these two teams played Oregon State in back-to-back weeks. They beat them by about the same margin. The Big Ten, likewise. Like if you're trying to look at the Big Ten's profile, what's their most impressive out-of-conference win? It's Ohio State, Texas. The next one's like Illinois, Duke, which doesn't mean anything. The Big Ten could be the greatest conference on the face of the earth. The Big 12 could be right there with them. We just don't know because their entire stat profile has been built mainly off of in-conference play. So with Texas Tech, you got to trust your eyes. What do the eyes tell you about Texas Tech? Well, my eyes tell me they're really good because not only have they beaten the competition, but they've pretty thoroughly splattered the competition this year. But there's always that one little pesky voice of doubt in the back of your mind that says, psst, but it was all against Big 12 teams. Yes, that is accurate. However, maybe the Big 12's okay. And also maybe the fact that it wasn't just a bunch of 3 and 7 point wins, but rather 22-plus point wins. Maybe that means a lot. Maybe it means a little. Yeah. So trust your eyes with Texas Tech. I've seen them in person. I've watched them several times. You've watched them several times. They're a good team. They're a good team. The number on this game is Oregon minus 2.5. Oregon, I think, still has room between wherever their head is and wherever the ceiling is. They're pretty unique in that way. Partly because of injury, partly because I always believed this was going to be a team that scaled late because of new pieces, because of young pieces, also because I think that's the way they've built the team. They've structured their entire season. So we have to ask ourselves, same thing we got out of Ohio State last year. If any team is to do that in the playoffs, is it Oregon? Do they just rev the engine and have that potential? I think they do. It's not a guarantee they're going to do it, though. So here's what I think about the game. Oregon has to find out. And what they have to find out is whether this paper, nope, that's 2 pieces, hold on, whether this paper right here is telling the truth. Because on this piece of paper that I hold in my hand, it says Texas Tech has the number 1 run defense in America. Can you believe that? I can. I've watched them all year. Does Oregon believe that? I'm sure they believe they're pretty good. Do they fear them? Forget that. Do they look at them and really say, yeah, we might as well not even try? Of course not. So, watch Texas Tech all year. The team that had the most success on the ground against them was Kansas State, and that was 126 yards, I believe. So no one ran it effectively on them. Now, here's where that whole trust your eyes thing comes into play. Because there is one scenario where, of course, Texas Tech is just that good and you're not running it on them. There's another scenario where there's a certain caliber of athlete at tailback. There's a certain caliber of athlete along the offensive lines in the Big 12 that Oregon is a little bit better than, a little bit more multiple than, a little bit more dynamic than. Maybe there's a certain way Texas Tech plays the run that translates very well against Big 12 teams and Big 12 personnel that maybe could get exposed against Oregon. At the very least, you got to find out. You got to find out because if you can't run the ball, you're not really winning many games. If you're Oregon, Oregon thinks they can run it on anyone. Sometimes they do. Most times they do. Occasionally they don't. Indiana throttled them down pretty good. But it's the most important facet of this game to me. I could talk another 30 minutes about it, but really the padlock stats for Oregon outside of turnover margin, the padlock stat to me is going to be a lot of rushing efficiency-based stats for the Oregon Ducks. Oregon, consequently, I hate doing this. Jesse, just go ahead and text Joey McGuire. Just let him know what I'm going to do. I already made this bet, so I can't go back on this. Technically I could, but I'm not going to. That would be unethical. I bet Oregon over 142 rush yards. It's my favorite prop of the entire playoff quarterfinal round. There. I did it to myself. If you know my theory on betting against Texas Tech. It's very much in play here. So, but I want to be in the spirit of being honest. I'm just telling you, I hammered that thing. Consequently, I think it's a 144 now because of what my $600 did to it. So if Oregon does hit a brick wall, if my bet flames out and Oregon's get like 63 total yards on 30 carries, then bad news. Bad news for Oregon, obviously. But if they do hit a brick wall, that is Texas Tech's sweet spot. David Bailey, Romello Height, all these dudes they brought in via the portal. And Joey McGuire was on this very show in the spring talking about him. And then everything that they hoped would come to pass came to pass. Top 10 pressure rate team in the country. They lead the country in takeaways. Why is that? Because teams rarely get to have a balanced approach offensively against Texas Tech because teams are rarely in the lead or even tied with Texas Tech. Therefore, they got themselves in several situations where they could just pin their ears back, and they ate pretty heartily this year. Number 10 defense in third down conversion rate as well. So it's just tough to sustain drives against them. And if you're not balanced in your play calling, and that's because either you can't or you're in a situation where you're unable to, every series that Texas Tech has go that way, it starts to validate them a little bit more. And a little bit more and a little bit more. And then conversely, if you think about Oregon, think about the way their season went. I don't know if you remember how you felt watching the Oregon-Indiana game, but I do, because I thought Oregon would handle Indiana, and I was very wrong about that. And the more and more that game went on in the second half, the more and more I realized I've made a huge mistake. I have made a monumental mistake. Now, in my case, that means I have to go on my show the next night and own it. Quick 5-second timeout. Check and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. It keeps it free. We love you. All right, back to the show. Some of you get to hide. I didn't. That was not a good week for me. And let's say I pick Oregon to win this game. I already picked them to go over 142 rushing yards. As soon as the door starts to get slammed in their face repeatedly, trying to run the ball, and as soon as Texas Tech is getting after Dante Moore on third down, series after series, not only does Texas Tech start validating everything they believe about themselves, but you also have that sense of doubt that you felt when you watched the Indiana game. At least I would. Now, I'm not playing for Oregon, so maybe it's irrelevant for them. I'm just trying to map out how I would feel as this game unfolded. But I'll tell you the opposite's true as well. Because if Oregon starts ripping off some chunk runs early in this game, you know they can throw the ball as well. So, it's not like they're solely dependent. They're not Alabama. They're not dependent on one thing disproportionately working out because they can't really do the other thing. Well, then, Jesse, they told us they weren't going to blow the train horns during the show. Oh, they didn't tell us that. Okay. Well, we are the freights for a reason. Anyway, the opposite is true as well. Because just imagine with me, close your eyes, unless you're driving, close your eyes, and let's picture this game, late first quarter, and Oregon's already got a couple of runs of 12-plus yards. And you're saying to yourself, well, maybe that paper was lying to me a little bit. And then maybe there's a little bit of doubt because what Texas Tech hasn't been is pressed virtually all year. They lost that Arizona State game, and that was with the backup quarterback. And outside of that, even Arizona State didn't run the ball on them. So even in their loss, no one ran the ball on them. If Oregon starts to run the ball on them, you kind of start to wonder, man, maybe we were a product of the Big 12. And then Oregon starts to think maybe we are peaking at the right time. So, there's a lot of psychology that goes into that, which is just a fancy way of saying, I don't feel like pulling a grease board down here and going Dan Orlovsky on you, so I'm just going to use the word psychology instead. This could be where the game turns, though, the whole game script approach, because there's a very familiar game script that Texas Tech has just been able to follow all year. And if the aforementioned scenario starts to unfold, it doesn't mean Texas Tech can't win. There's certainly a world here where Oregon runs it for 160 and Texas Tech still wins. It's just that they have to win in an unfamiliar way. Well, they can do that. But Dante Moore and Oregon's wide receivers versus Texas Tech's pass defense, just fascinating. Just fascinated to see it because that's another one of the areas where, all due respect to the teams that Texas Tech has faced, I don't think they saw skill players like that in totality. There may have been one here and there, but I don't think they saw a set of them like that. And I don't even know if Evan Stewart's going to play in this game. If he does, wonderful. That's a boost for Oregon. But even if he doesn't, Texas Tech has not faced a top 35 passing offense. And while statistically, Oregon is not a top 35 passing offense, there are not 35 better passing offenses in the country than Oregon. I don't know how better to describe that or explain that than the way I just did. So what if Texas Tech creases Oregon on the ground? You know, that's yet another way. That's yet another angle to think about. For all the talk here so far about, well, what if Oregon finds a disproportionate amount of success on the ground? Hey, that'd be notable. You know what else would be notable? What if Cameron Dickey and Jacoby Williams just start ripping off explosive runs of their own? Each of them averaged 5.5 yards per attempt. You can run on Oregon. Not easily, but they can run it on Oregon as well. That is the modus operandi for both of these teams. That's how they win. So if Oregon's going to win, that's how they're going to do it. But don't think for a second you couldn't get to the end of the first quarter and Texas Tech doesn't already have 88 on the board, on the ground as well. Intangibles, very, very important in every football game, especially in playoff games, doubly especially when you got one team that's rested and on a bye and they're both playing on a neutral site. I can't help but keep going back to the idea that everything's new here for Texas Tech. They're a very untested team. But I say that in a very specific way. They're untested when it comes to being in dogfights in the fourth quarter. They've been tested, but just in a much different way. The test for them was in a conference full of rosters that really, really rely on returning production and culture, togetherness. Guys have played multiple years together. Texas Tech's challenge was to throw a new team together. New coordinators as well. Don't forget about that. So there was staff churn, there was roster churn, and you may think to yourself, oh, yeah, big deal. What's the challenge? You just went out and got a whole bunch of players. Well, that happens a lot. A lot of places did that this year and didn't win. Texas Tech did it and won. So everything Joey said when he came on the show in the spring about how you're going to see what I'm talking about. This is him talking now, not me. He said, you're going to see what I'm talking about. Yeah, we went and got a bunch of basic free agents. Yeah, we went and portaled a lot of guys in here, but I promise you this is the best building I've been in. We really, really believe in the culture we've got here. We really believe in the team dynamic we've built. Well, he was right. He was right. So how does that manifest itself if Oregon's up by 3 and you need a drive with 5 minutes to go? Because that's a spot you just hadn't been in. And it's a spot you may very well find yourself in here. The staff churn at Oregon's a real thing. I don't know how to quantify the value here, but this is not nothing. Will Stein is the new head coach in Kentucky, but he is sticking around throughout the duration of the playoffs. Taj Lupoy is the new head coach at Cal. He is sticking around through the duration of the playoffs. We saw Mike Elko and A&M struggle with this. It's a new concept. It's not a new concept that coaches take jobs and stick around. It's a new concept that they're taking new jobs. Oh, and by the way, the portal is opening in about 5 days. And so not only do you have to have your staff together, like you're off and running maybe while your team is still playing. Like that's a new dynamic. Not the least of which of your concerns include staffing and the fact that you may be taking guys out of the very building you're leaving. Yeah. So with all that in mind, let's take a look at what the model thinks. FanDuel right now has Oregon minus 2.5. I have believed the entire season that we are building towards a spot where Oregon revs the engine a little bit when they get to the playoff. It's an added benefit that they're getting some players back. I simply believe Oregon is a better football team, and they're going to rev the engine here a little bit. What I do not believe is that this is any kind of mismatch or anything like that. I think Oregon's going to win because I think they'll have a little more success on the ground than people are anticipating. That's it. 4-quarter game. No knock on Texas Tech. Point spread is what it is for a reason, but I'm going to take Oregon to win and cover.